Extensive epistolary letter. Concerning the Philosopher's Stone. By the well-born Count Bernhard of the Mark and Trevis. Which he wrote in confidence to his aforementioned trusted and in the art experienced friend. Thomas of Bononia Physician to Charles VIII. King of France, in secret correspondence. Formerly published by Dr. Joachim Tank. Now newly reviewed and in many places corrected and improved by Caspar Horn, Doctor of Medicine. Nuremberg. Published by Wolfgang Enter. 1643. Count Bernhard of Trevis. Letter and reply to Master Thomas of Bononia. Personal physician to Charles VIII, King of France. My greeting and most diligent service be unto you beforehand. Most learned doctor, dear friend, etc. I inform you that I have received from Master Alderich your long and extensive letter, together with the stone of your secret work, well and safely. From it I have perceived a particular token of your good friendship toward me. Moreover, I have sufficiently gathered from it, and am now fully assured, that your noble ingenuity and sharp understanding have been unerringly directed. Therefore, I am all the more willing to respond to your letter. For some things you have written are keen and rightly stated, which I do gladly accept, yet other things I will take the liberty to contradict, not, indeed, as though I presume myself to be above you, but solely in your honor. I shall pass through them briefly and in a philosophical manner. For it is so in this, as in other arts as well, that practice and experience must prove the intended theory and speculation to be true. Now since we, dear doctor, cannot be together in body, let us visit one another through such writings and replies. Yet you know well that a wise man recognizes and considers a matter according to its true causes. For what one does not rightly understand will later deceive him also in the experience. And whoever would philosophize must possess a firm and understanding reflection, if he wishes to rightly bring the work he undertakes to its ultimate perfection, and attain the same. For that many who wish to work in this art go astray and fall into error, this arises solely because they do not grasp, in their minds, an understanding of the practica. Whereas they ought first to have comprehended in their minds a true understanding of the work, before they lay hands upon it. For indeed, the work must follow nature, and nature will not be compelled to follow the work or the art. Therefore, whoever wishes to accomplish something good must direct his understanding toward this, that he recognize the properties, ends, and nature of a thing. Then may he, without fear, proceed to the labor of the hands. That you, however, are most understanding in all these matters, this I have been able to gather abundantly from your letter, since you therein base yourself upon experience and practical knowledge. For as you rightly write, just as common water, which by its nature is cold and moist, when it is mixed with vegetative substances, takes on other qualities and properties, namely, those of the things with which it is mixed and boiled, so also mercury, when it is mixed with a related substance, takes on other natures and properties. As when it is mixed with gold, it takes upon itself the nature of the sun, solis. With Venus, the nature of Venus, Veneris. With the moon, the properties of the moon, Luni. And so on with other metallic species. Therefore, the metallic species must be cooked within it. And mercury is their water. When he is transformed within them, he takes on their transformation in such manner that he is altered and transmuted according to their kind. And this water draws unto itself the nature of the metallic species, in like manner as common water draws unto itself the nature of the vegetables that are boiled therein, only with this distinction, that outwardly, in the flowing mercury, the color is not altered by the dissolving metallic species, because the matter and the earths, which are present together in a certain proportion, within the water of mercury, are of a very dense nature, which is not the case in other clear humors and waters. Yet this metallic nature, when it is altered and changed, does indeed alter itself, but its color remains outwardly concealed under the form of mercury, and the changed corpus in the mercury cannot be seen from without. However, this has been extensively debated and proven by you. how common flowing spring water is the first material and nourishment of the vegetabilia, and likewise of all living creatures, and the things that move upon the earth. Therefore, when any of these are cooked in common water, the water takes on from them the highest coldness. Yet when something is boiled in it, it may impart a warmth of the first degree upon us, as your words state. Furthermore, nothing creates nourishment better than a decoction, or a good meat broth, or when the broth from meat or herbs, in which they are cooked, is strained, or when the pieces themselves, cooked in the water, are taken in while still moist, or, when after cooking, only the water is drunk. This harms no one, but rather helps and is beneficial, even though it might previously have been harmful in its common and bad nature. But now, it is no longer harmful, because this water or broth is no longer water as it was before. In the same way, mercury is the materia of all metals, and is related to the metals, just as common water has a kinship and similarity of nature with the vegetabilia and animalia. Mercury also draws to itself the power of the things that are attached to it, and with which it is mixed in the decoction. And although it is by nature the coldest, it may, in a short time, become of the hottest nature. Likewise, it can also become of a moderate or temperate nature, when it is mixed with things of a moderate nature. But this requires very subtle art. But no metal clings to it better than gold, as you say. Therefore, some hold and conclude that gold is nothing but a mercury coagulated by the power of sulfur. From this, you would infer, as I believe rightly and truly, that if one were to cook or dissolve gold in mercury, according to the customary manner, and by the natural way of the art, then mercury would take upon itself the natural properties of gold. However, the path of this decoction, and the dissolution of metals, is known to very few people. For the cause or origin of this dissolution and resolution arises when, namely, the moisture or fluidity of mercury is restricted, pulled together, or thickened by the thickness of its homogeneous earths. That is, such earths which have such a similar nature and essence to it, mercury, that one can accept the other, and the other can adhere to it. And thus, conversely, when the thickness of such homogeneous earths is loosened by the watery nature or moisture of mercury, the hard earthly substance is released from it. And in such a solution, the coldness of the earths must be tempered by its water, which is similar to them, and of like nature. Yet the qualities must always remain in their homogeneity. That is, there must be a balanced relationship between the qualities of water in nature. In this same solution, there is a simple dryness, a double coldness, and a single moisture. And yet these things are in unequal proportions to one another, when one observes their timing. And the same must be held to the natural proportions. That is, in the properly cooked and sufficiently prepared gold, the qualities are not, as in this solution, in unequal proportions, but instead are completely equal and balanced. Thus, the dissolving agent, from the body that is dissolved by it, is distinguished in proportion and digestion, which between them is unequal, and not as if there were a difference between the material and the waters. Then, even if nothing is added to mercury, nature, without further addition, makes gold from mercury itself, just as nature, marvelously and wondrously, generates gold from mercury, as you have described in your writings. For dissolving the vegetabilia internally, common water is used for this purpose, so that through art, what was previously coagulated is dissolved, and its power is transferred to the water. And when something is dissolved, this dissolution occurs in conjunction with the coagulation of the water, and the coagulation of the water happens simultaneously with the dissolution of the same thing. Thus, conversely, it is the same with mineral water, in its metallic species and kinds. Whoever understands the art and the secret of dissolution has come to the true likeness of the art, namely, how one must mix the species and extract the natures from the natures, which are powerfully hidden within them. How can one have found the truth? Who destroys the moist or liquid nature of mercury, as some fools tend to do? Who bring mercury and its species or form out of its metallic disposition or dissolution into another, foreign form, and destroy its metallic moisture in their dissolving, and separate its proportion, bringing it into another proportion, which is a foreign quality, and does not align or harmonize with the first mineral proportion and quality. This proportion requires nothing else but only the purification or cleanliness and simple, common decoction. For example, there are some who dissolve mercury in all kinds of salts, vitriol, and alum-like substances, and destroy it, and bring it into another water than the nature of mercury. For the seed which nature wisely and for our good has made, they attempt to perfect and improve it by force, and by breaking it apart. But in doing so, they destroy and break it without a doubt, and nothing can come of it. For we see that in humans, animals, and growing things, the seed is made by nature, and not by art. But the art brings the seeds together, and mixes them, without adding anything to them, nor taking anything from them. For if something of the same species is to be created, and brought forth into a new generation, then the same and equal matter, both in nature and in art, must exist and endure. Only then can a similar and equal form follow, and no other. Therefore, most learned Sir Doctor, everything that is taught about altering or changing mercury is false and invalid. For mercury is the seed before the combination of the metallic species with it. When it is dried out, it no longer dissolves anything. So what should it accomplish by dissolving metallic species? For when it is heated or dried out, outside of the natural digestion, it does not create such a mild warmth in the mineral species, as only a febrile heat should. Thus, it is wrongly transformed from cold to hot, and from passive or suffering to active or effective, which causes great and irreversible loss and error, and the work is ruined. For example, some fools make corrosive and devouring waters from the lesser minerals, into which they throw the metallic species, and let them dissolve therein. They think that the species have been naturally dissolved. But true dissolution requires that the dissolving and the dissolved must remain together, and from both, a new species or form should arise. Just as from the male and female seeds, a new being is born. Truly, I say to you, that no water, through natural reduction, dissolves a metallic species, but only the water that remains with its matter and form. The dissolved metals can then be coagulated. But this cannot happen with separating waters or other sharp waters. Instead, with them, the composites are more so harmed, and the bodies that one intends to dissolve are spoiled and ruined. It also pertains to the bodies, in the solutions, that no water should remain with them in the coagulations, which cannot stay with them. And to state it clearly, mercury is such a water, and not the sharp separating water. It is also not, as some fools believe, a mercurial, bright, transparent water. For when one separates and destroys the homogeneous and equal substance of mercury, how can the initial proportion of its feminine seed be preserved and maintained? Thus, in this way, mercury will not be able to coagulate with the dissolved body, and no species will arise from it by the art's administration, but rather a pure, useless thing. Nevertheless, some believe they are dissolving in this manner, while they err in nature and do not actually dissolve. For when the separating waters are removed from the bodies, the body can still be melted as before. And such water cannot remain with the body. Nor can it be considered as moisture that belongs to it in its root. The bodies are corroded and consumed, but not dissolved. And the more they are corroded, the further they are separated and estranged from the metallic species. Therefore, such solutions have no foundation in the art of changing metals, but are deceits of sophists and misguided alchemists, who believe that in such things this worthy art is hidden. They claim that they make solutions, but they will never make the metallic species perfect or complete, for they do not remain as they should in nature, with the first proportion, species, or form, which the true water of mercury allows to remain in the metallic species. For mercury is corrupted or destroyed with them, not in such a way that it is broken and divided, but in an alterative manner. That is, in such a way that it is changed with them. For the dissolved bodies, which are dissolved in it, cannot be separated from it afterward, just as the separating waters and corrosives can be separated from them. Then one species attracts another species, and merely hides the other, retaining one completely hidden within the other. Just as gold and silver, when they are dissolved in it, are secretly retained within it, for their nature remains hidden in mercury, until it begins to coagulate, or becomes thick again, which thickening or coagulation is caused by them, the dissolved metals, and is a secret cause of it, since they lie hidden within it, in mercury, as dissolved bodies. And just as at first mercury dissolves the metals, and hides them in its belly, so they also coagulate against it. And thus what was hard becomes soft, and what was soft becomes hard. Yet the species always remain, which species is nothing other than the metals and mercury. Whoever thus dissolves also coagulates more. And the metallic species, which are disturbed and reassembled, take on their former form again, through the decoction of the art. And although this dissolution causes various colors to appear, because the species seem as if they are dead and lying still, the inner proportion should always remain whole and unshaken. Therefore, the Lord Christ gives a parable about the vegetables, when he says, "Unless the grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it brings forth much fruit." Thus, it is also with this alterative corruption, or destruction, which exists solely in the change, that it hides the forms, dissolves the natures, retains the proportions, and changes the colors from beginning to end. For when the water begins to cover the earth, the black color begins to hide under the white color and be lost. And when the air begins to cover the water and the earth, the yellow color appears, which is finally transformed into a red, when the fire covers the air, or the remaining three elements. And these final colors initially hide secretly, remaining hidden within the form of a white spirit, in the flowing or liquid mercury, until they are thickened again into a powder, which lies within the bodies. For the soul lies hidden in the spirit, just as in the thickening of the spirit the soul lies hidden in the powder or body. For in the things that are to be changed, the corruption takes place, but not a separation of parts. It would then be that one should remove some superfluous parts, those that are useless for generation. Therefore, a true master should cleanse his work well, so that the digestion may proceed better. This can be seen in the preceding example of the wheat grain. For if one takes a grain and throws it into the earth, it decays and dies, losing its outward form, and is not scattered within. But in its time it grows up again and brings forth much fruit. This is called corruption, and is nothing other than the shedding of form, and not the destruction and separation of matter. But if another grain is taken and thrown into the fire, both its matter and its form are destroyed, and all is separated. And such corruption is completely unsuitable for generation. Therefore, no water should dissolve the bodies, except the water which is of its own species. And thus, conversely, it should be thickened by the bodies. The bodies should also not be nourished in generation, but only by something that is of their own kind, through which the species may be preserved, which were destroyed in the body to be transmuted, through the art of this work. However, with the vegetables, it is a different matter, for they draw their nourishment from various species. Yet before these species become nourishment for them, they must first be made equal by a dissolution of the proportion of those things, from which they are drawn for nourishment. Now it must be understood that the dissolutions of metals happen in various ways. The first is the one known to fools, as mentioned above, and occurs with external things, which cannot remain with the dissolved metals, and which should rather be called a corruption and destruction of the composition than a solution. The second solution is the one which occurs through the power and force of fire, which is also not a true or proper solution, but is rather a liquefaction or melting of the elemental parts bound together. Then, the external heat of the fire affects the internal composition, and resolves it. And because the internal fire resides in the air, it also resolves the air. The resolved air, in turn, lives in the water, and the water in the earth, such that it melts both the active and passive, both the suffering and the working. But this melting is not a true dissolution, but a destruction and separation. For in this process, the uniform and homogeneous elements have a fixed proportion, mixed through digestion, and each is born from the other. Therefore, this happens in the pure bodies, in which the elemental natures are fixed and stable. Hence, the fire melts them and brings the entire composition into flow. But it does not separate them. For the fire cannot flow, it flows only through its substantial air. The air does not flow unless the water is dissolved. The water does not flow unless the earth is also dissolved. And so, conversely, as the earth is dissolved by the water, so the water retains and coagulates the air. And thus, when one rises again in the same manner, the air retains the fire in its coagulation. When the elements, which are more stable and fixed, work together, they cause a fixation, such as the earth and water. Conversely, the air and fire work together and interact to bring about dissolution. But this solution is called a melting of the composition, and is not properly called a solution, since the parts that can be separated, and are united in the generation of the composition, are not separated here, as happens in the third and true philosophical solution, in which the composition is dissolved in the aforementioned way. Yet, the parts of the composition remain undivided, even though they can be separated. Thus, the power and virtue of the elements, which are most easily digested, are drawn out from the things being dissolved by the solvent and dissolving agent, namely by mercury. The coarse and thick parts in this dissolution take on a high degree of subtlety, as the body is transformed into a spirit, and conversely, the spirit is made into a body. The fixed becomes volatile, and the volatile becomes fixed. Now, such a solution is natural and can be achieved through the art that assists nature, and this is the only and necessary solution in the philosophical work. It can be accomplished by nothing else but mercury, with a sharp proportion, as a good master, who understands the inner natures and proportions, should establish the proportion at the beginning of the work. For this high work, these two elements alone can make it, and nothing else goes into it but these two, multiplied and generated, just as mentioned above. Furthermore, you also say that gold, as many people believe, is nothing but mercury, which has been coagulated by the power or force of sulfur, yet in such a way that no trace of the sulfur remains in the substance of the gold that has coagulated it. Just as with a child conceived in the mother's womb, where, as Aristotle holds, nothing of the father's seed remains, but the father's seed alone coagulates the woman's menstrual blood, so you also say that when mercury is coagulated by sulfur, the form of gold is then perfected in it, through the power of the heavenly influence of the stars, and especially the sun. But my opinion is that one should not hold this view. According to the philosophers, one should believe that gold is nothing but an anodized mercury, a mercury that has been digested under the mineral earth. The philosophers have taught that gold is created when mercury encounters sulfur, which coagulates it through its power, by digesting the mercury with well-proportioned heat and thickens and solidifies it. Therefore, one should know that gold is both sulfur and mercury at once, that is, both the coagulating and the coagulated thing, and it comes from nowhere else but from a pure digestion, cooking, or maturation, which increases its qualities, and always brings one element out of another, so that they come forth from their potential or hidden state into actuality, that is, into visible appearance or into the light, without anything being added from elsewhere. This digestion or maturation is brought into effect by the upper and higher elements, namely air and fire, which, although not yet visible in actuality or in truth in mercury, are awakened by external warmth, and with their help, they feel and are digested by their own and natural warmth. They make the passive elements, which are in mercury in actuality, that is, clearer and more visible, and not only in potential. This makes them subtler, so they approach the water, and the water approaches, becoming subtler toward the air, and the air approaches the fire. In this proportionate working of nature, and of the digestion of mercury, both the male and female seeds remain closed within their natures. The female seed, indeed, is earth and water, while the male seed is air and fire. The philosophers call the earth and water in gold mercury, but they say the air and fire in it are sulfur. There is also no other addition to the interior of the earth, and for this reason, in the art, no external addition is required to digest and thicken mercury, so that it becomes gold or another species. Therefore, the philosophers have said that sulfur and mercury make gold, that is, its corporeality, bodily existence, and stability. Hence, it should not be concluded from this that the external warmth, which is applied through art, by which the internally proportioned warmth is raised and assisted, helping the less digested and untimely elements, water and earth, that are in mercury, to be digested and matured, is a part or component of the substance of the composite. The external warmth does not remain within the weight or quantity of a thing, nor does it add anything to it. However, the internal, proportioned, and natural simple warmth does remain with the quantity and weight of the mercury, which has been digested by it. For this warmth is internal and an essential part of the mercury itself. It is indeed nothing other than the two powerful and active forces within it, air and fire. Therefore, the fools misunderstand the philosophical saying when it is said that sulfur and mercury generate gold. For, as is well known, just as the two elements, air and fire, are neither separated nor divided from the earth and water in the initial mercurial composition, nor later in the natural metallic digestion, so likewise sulfur, which is nothing other than fire and air, is not separated or divided from mercury, which is nothing other than earth and water. Thus, if the opposite were true, he would be no true natural philosopher. For the digestion of gold occurs and happens solely from the very first mercurial proportion, so that neither under the earth, by nature, nor upon the earth, by the art of it, is any further addition made, as has already been stated. However, as said earlier, this does not contradict the fact that in this art, pure gold and pure mercury should be brought together or combined. This happens not due to the reasons that one might conclude, as if sulfur were different in gold and mercury, or if mercury and gold were different from that in mercury, but it happens because in gold there is a complete and timely digestion, just as in mercury, and because the sulfur in gold is more timely and better digested, and therefore more powerful and effective than in common mercury. Thus, the philosophers said that gold is nothing but timely mercury. For in mercury, there are indeed visible, actual elements, namely, water and earth, which are called the passive or suffering elements. The other two active or working elements, namely, air and fire, are only hidden in mercury. But as is well known, when these two, air and fire, are brought forth from their hidden state in pure mercury and begin to work, that is, when they come to the appropriate digestion and proportioned boiling, gold is made from it. Therefore, in gold, the four elements are united in a balanced and analogous proportion. Thus, in gold, sulfur is more timely and effective, namely, fire and air, than in mercury. Thus, through the art, the cause is found in dissolving gold with mercury, so that the untimely is helped by the timely. And so, as the art cooks, nature perfects it, and through the grace of God, the composition is brought to completion more quickly and in a shorter time. From this, one can easily recognize and understand why, in the work of the philosophical art, nobler, more complete, and higher gold is made in a shorter time than what can be achieved through the work of nature. For nature does nothing other than digest and cook the single mercury for itself, alone, in the veins of the earth, without any further help or addition. Therefore, it cannot quickly reach the required proportion and perfection of gold or another metal. But our art assists nature's work by adding timely gold to the mercury, which contains a highly digested sulfur that quickly makes the mercury timely and digested to the analogous and comparable proportion of gold. In doing so, it makes the elements of mercury ever more subtle. Therefore, this art results in a remarkable shortening of the natural process. Hence, dear Sir Doctor, to return to my original point, one should not be misled by those who err and say that the active male seed in the coagulation joins with the female seed, but after the coagulation is done, they separate again. For, as is well known, in every generation of bodily fruit or child, there is an active and a passive force, one that works and one that suffers. But both the active and the passive forces, that is, all four elements, must always remain together, otherwise no mixing can occur, nor can any fruit be hoped for. For in every human being, as soon as the male seed is mixed from the beginning, it remains, the male seed, always until the end of the human life, as an agent or active force with the female seed. Even if it is spilled or consumed, nature brings it back to growth, increases it properly, and creates within the same human being a similar seed in his loins, from which afterwards his likeness or species may be born. And likewise, the same idea applies to the female seed in female bodies, as was previously discussed about the male seed in male bodies. Therefore, both seeds exist, and they should both be considered as the original agents and patients, that is, as the two active and passive forces. Yet, the generation of natural things is diverse and distinguished by the various ways in which naturally mixed and growing things are differentiated. First, there are the simply mixed things, which are born under the earth. However, we cannot see their composition with our eyes, they are born solely from the combination of the assembled elements or from their initial resolution. They do not grow larger in the same way as plants do, nor do they increase in size. Instead, the mass or lump of the mercurial substance in the veins or channels of the earth, in its mineral disposition, retains the same weight after its complete digestion as it had at the start. Yes, it may even decrease in weight because it expels the dross and slag, but it does not increase in weight or substance, and the reason for this is that it does not take in nourishment as plants do. In this first and simple natural mixture, there are various grades. The first degree is nothing more than a mere combination of the four elements, and there is no change or elevation of one element over another in this first degree. It is only a poor and persistent union of such a composition, where one element is compared to another as a single piece. Such are, in general, the stones created by nature. The second degree follows from this first, for from the stones now mentioned, the minerals, which we are discussing here, are born, and here the more precious and noble species emerge, which grow under the earth. In this degree, the influence of the elements begins, and one starts to transform into the other. However, their action is not yet as alive and powerful as it is in the plants or other living things, for the mineral elements do not have growth or sensitivity, nor do they possess the feeling power, as previously mentioned. The third degree contains the noble stones, for in them lies a completed and finished action, which is formed through the force of the assembled and interacting elements. As I have explained in greater detail in my philosophy, this third degree, along with the others, is the middle stage between the first and second compositions of natural things. Thus, it is called the second generation, which does not include the simply mixed things, those poorly composed substances. Rather, It includes the composition of the vegetabilia or plant growths, which are distributed into various species or forms, as I have explained in my other book, which I have sent to you as needed. The vegetabilia, and especially the living animals, generate and bring forth their like, commonly and most often from both seeds, that of the male and the female, when they are first mixed in coitus and meet or encounter each other. In this respect, the philosophical art follows the work of nature in the generation of gold. Indeed, no one can create human seed through art. However, what can be done through art is to make a person suitable or capable of generating their like. The living seeds are digested by nature alone, in a vegetative or growing manner, in the loins of both parents, but the two seeds of the parents can be mixed in the natural vessels, meaning the womb, through coitus, which is in a sense like the art that prepares and mixes the natural seeds for the birth and generation of a human. For example, the seed of the man, being the more timely, perfect, and effective, is added through art and advantage to the female seed, which is less timely and more passive or suffering in nature. However, the male seed, by its very act, has the active elements, such as fire and air, within it and enlivens them. Therefore, it is more suitable for digestion, being stronger and more energetic. The female seed, on the other hand, has the more passive elements, such as earth and water, which are less capable of digestion and require them. When these two are poured into the natural vessel of the mother and mixed together, the active or working elements of the male seed begin to act upon the female seed, digesting it and making it more timely. From this, a perfect human is born in nature. And all of this happens without the aid of anything external, except that the external warmth of the woman awakens the inner proportionate warmth within the man's seed, strengthening it and helping it along. In the same way, our philosophical art works, akin to the birth of a human. Just as in mercury, from which nature forms gold in the mineral vessels beneath the earth, a natural union takes place between the two seeds of the male and female, so too, in our art, an artificial or uniform union of the passive and active parts occurs. In this process, the active elements, which are considered the male seed, are united with the passive or suffering elements, which are like the female seed. However, this must be done with due regard to the necessary proportion in nature. This conjunction and union is called the first mercurial digestion, from which the hidden is raised and made visible, namely, the male seed from the female, meaning the elements of air and fire emerge from earth and water through a process of pure digestion and refinement. Beyond this natural digestion of the seed in mercury, the sharp-minded philosophers and masters, by following nature, have created another union and digestion, made through sharp and subtle invention. Therefore, in their art, they have not only produced simple gold, but something higher than gold. They have commanded that gold, in which the active or stronger elements are present, be united with mercury, in which the passive or suffering elements are contained, so that the gold can be duly and properly dissolved. And external things must be put aside, except for the external warmth, which awakens the internal natural heat, helping the gold to be activated. Through this strong action, the mercury is digested, and the gold is brought to its timely form, just as a human is born by nature, so through art, gold is born. Yet, the seed cannot be made by art, for the art does not know the necessary mixture and proportion required for generating the seed. It also does not know the composition within humans, nor the first mixture or proportion, nor the causes of these things, from which, in the mineral substances beneath the earth, the seeds flow, as their natural place for generation. This is all hidden from the art. However, the art can bring together the seeds that are made by nature, joining them through art so that from this combination, something is brought forth. In this, both seeds remain mixed and together, even though Aristotle, as you write, seems to hold a different view on this. Thus, the male seed, or our sulfur, does not grow from it after the coagulation of mercury, as some falsely claim, that it happens through the power of the sun. They suggest that gold and its form are made and completed by the sun's warmth within the earth, but this is not the case. It happens rather through the power and motion of the sun and its spheres, and in a way, through the overall power and movement of the entire heavens. The rays of the sun only reach the earth's surface externally, they cannot penetrate deeply into the earth, where the mineral species are born. The influence of the heavens through the rays or beams does not extend to these deepest places. Indeed, the motion and movement of the elements beneath the earth come primarily from the movement of the heavens, but not from the rays of its light, nor from its heat, or any other influence outside of its movement. How this occurs and what causes the things beneath the earth to move in such a way, I believe, is not unknown to the Lord, and thus I leave it there for now. Therefore, the sun is not the primary cause from which the generation and form of gold come, although it does have other names. Just as the sun, Sol, is hotter than the other planets, so too is gold hotter than the other metals, and thus it shares a similar distinction with the sun. The other metals also, by comparison with the planets, have received similar names, which have led many fools to be deceived. They think that each planet, in general, and especially through its own influence, generates a particular type or species of metal that corresponds with the characteristics of that planet. However, this is not the case. The things that are born beneath the earth, or that grow above the earth, such as the vegetabilia, do not proceed in the same way, nor in the same manner. There is a distinction between these two. For in the vegetabilia, the sun is a cause of generation and growth, not only due to its motion but also because of its warmth, which passes through its rays and light. Thus, the sun warms both the earth's vegetation and the earth itself, as the elements reflect and meet through its rays and beams upon the earth's surface. The rays can reach no deeper, up to that point, where they are effective. For example, when one descends from the highest 12th heaven, the deeper one goes, the thicker and less subtle the orbs or celestial spheres become, until reaching the sphere of the moon, within which everything that is changeable is contained and enclosed. Here, under the circle of the moon, the elements mix and give birth to all things, which are born and die again. Therefore, under the moon's circle, one finds a subtle and simple fire, though it is not a completely pure fire. For in things that are changeable, one never finds a purely separate or perfectly pure fire, just as no element can be found entirely pure in this way. In anything that is made from the elements, there is always a simple fire, but it is mixed with another simple element. Otherwise, there would not be 4 or more elements, but only one element. Thus, the rays, beams, or beams of the heavens, particularly the sun, pass uninterrupted through the aforementioned regions until they reflect better in the region of fire, due to its density, compared to the subtlety of the heavens. When they move further down into the sphere of fire, they reflect the fire into the air, which is denser by nature than fire. Similarly, as the rays pass through a straight line deeper into the spheres of air, they are reflected in the water, which is denser than air, and thus, they are reflected back into the air, which can be felt here on earth as the densest of all elements. Through this boiling and reflection, the elements are moved in an invisible way, but not in an imperceptible way, for we feel the heat from the movement of the heavens, and we always feel that the highest and subtlest element reflects into the lower and denser element, all the way to the earth's surface, and this happens with the help of the rays and beams of the sun, which travel straight from above to below. When the movements and rays of the sun reflect in this way, an accidental and coincidental heat is caused. Although, through the rays of other stars, different qualities might occur here below, such as dryness or cold, as known in astronomy. But this does not occur because the rays themselves are of a hotter nature, but because, as mentioned, they are the cause of this heat or warmth. This is evident from astronomy and perspective, from which it is known how the generation and celestial influences act upon the earth's vegetation and living creatures. But this is enough to say for now. The false astrology, however, holds a different view and believes that the influences have their effects, as though the stars themselves have such power to act, and that these do not come from the power of movement. But this is false and wrong. The rays of the heavens do not create and direct anything from above in the heavens, such that from them the heavens would have an influence on these lowest earthly things. The rays cannot reflect into the imagined orbs and celestial spheres, nor can they mix with them, just as they reflect into the elements and mix with them, not in such a way that the rays create a composition with the elements, but rather that the elements reflect and mix due to movement, as shown. Up in the heavens, however, new impressions and new qualities cannot occur, although the rays, when they move through the elements, cause wondrous qualities through reflection. Therefore, my dear Sir Doctor, the sun is not in itself a special cause for the creation of gold, nor is it, in terms of its warmth, the reason for the growth of plants and other things on or beneath the earth, which are heated by the sun's rays, as I have already indicated. This also aligns with astronomy. However, it is unnecessary to argue further about this, and I wish to proceed to other matters. For from what has been said thus far, anyone who gives it careful attention can easily understand and discern that the form of gold is actually and especially brought about by the action of sulfur, which digests and coagulates mercury. So, as you wrote in your letter, do not understand this in the same way for other celestial bodies or other metals. What has been said can also be applied to each of the other metals, but with distinction, as in the other metals, there is a double or twofold sulfur. One is superfluous and can be separated from the metal, yet the form of the metal remains unchanged. There is, furthermore, another sulfur, which is an essential part of the metal, and is so closely bound to the mercury that they cannot be separated. Even if one tried to separate them, the metallic form would no longer exist. However, the imperfect sulfurous metal can be perfected and brought to completion by a medicine that corrupts and removes its form and gives it a better form. What you have written about this twofold sulfur in your philosophical work, how one should regard it, I would ask you, for the sake of our good friendship, to ponder thoroughly, without begrudging me. This twofold sulfur in mercury, which has been coagulated into all kinds of metals, is not distinguished in such a way that it is inwardly or essentially involved in the creation of the metals, as a real and substantial part of the metal. Rather, the other sulfur is assigned to imperfection and corruption. However, in each metallic species, as well as in gold and silver, there is a simple and singular sulfur, which is called mercury from the first mercurial composition, as already explained in the generation of gold. For sulfur and mercury are nothing other than the four elements, disposed in mercury in such a proportion as the specific requirements of this or another metallic species demand. What is considered the second sulfur, which is to be removed, is actually slag, and in a sense, it is the dregs that the metals attract during the coagulation of mercury. It is a superfluous substance that, being impure, cannot coagulate into the metallic form during the digestion of mercury. This superfluous matter is not homogeneous, meaning it does not share a uniform nature or proportion with mercury. Therefore, it is unsuitable for digestion and coagulation into metal. Some philosophers have referred to this impurity as a burnable sulfur, because it cannot remain in the sample of the metal but rather disappears or is separated as slag from the metal. To illustrate this, I will give an example. The blood in living creatures and the moisture in plants have unequal components in their coagulation. Some parts of the blood have a fleshy nature or proportion, and so they can thicken and become flesh, remaining uniform with the flesh. These parts are later called flesh. But other parts are superfluous moisture, which settles in the sweat glands and cannot be made into flesh, so they are expelled through purging or sweat, and separated from the initial good flesh. Such superfluous moisture is much less found in people of a sanguine complexion than in those of other complexions. Likewise, one can talk in a similar way about gold and other metals, namely, that after mercury has been purified and impure, it has attracted more or less natural slag and superfluity in its first coagulation. Therefore, there is inequality in the coagulation of mercury, which causes the difference and is the reason why not all mercury is transformed into the same metal. What remains in the metallic species is called a permanent, unburnable substance that cannot be separated from one another. Although fixed bodies, those that remain metal, like gold and silver, can be made volatile by art, they still remain undivided in their elemental proportions. But the slag that mercury has attracted and mixed with it in its first composition, remains in the coagulation, specifically through the heat that transforms mercury into a metallic species. It is excluded from the pure mercurial substance and its uniform nature as foreign, impure, and non-homogeneous, and is separated in the tests of the metallic species. This is not sulfur but slag and external superfluity. The first sulfur is nothing other than the pure action of air and fire, which heats, digests, and boils the water and earth that are related, homogeneous, and of the same nature and proportion in mercury. From this, it is clearly evident that in other metals that are not gold or silver, no other or more types of sulfur exist than in gold and silver. There is only one, simple, and singular sulfur, although in other imperfect metals, there may be more and greater superfluities than in gold. Furthermore, it is true what you say, that gold, more than any other metal, adheres to mercury. This happens due to the purity of both gold and mercury, as they contain much less slag, dregs, or superfluity than the other metals. For everything naturally desires to mix and unite with that which is closest to its nature, substance, and proportion, rather than with something unlike it. This is like water, which mixes easily and quickly with other water when poured together, so that the two become one. But with gold, nothing is other than pure mercury, and therefore, because it contains little slag, which is external to mercury and, as said, not of its nature, there is little difficulty for pure mercury to adhere to gold and silver, unlike with other metals, where the great amount of superfluous impurities in their coagulated mercury, or in the metals, hinders their ability to mix with another raw mercury. This superfluity, as mentioned, does not belong to the first composition of mercury, nor does it match its proportion, nor is it homogeneous or of its nature. Even though it may mix with mercury, it is still not mercurial in proportion or nature. What belongs to the proportion of a thing is not superfluous, therefore, such superfluities cannot be inseparably mixed with mercury, not only with mercury that one wants to coagulate by art, but even with mercury that has already coagulated and is mixed with these superfluities in the nature of the mineral or in the metallic species. And this is clear from the fact that such slag burns in the tests of fire and thus separates itself from the metals. So why should it be a wonder if they prevent the natural mixture, the lasting and permanent union, in those metals where they come without danger, and are accidentally added? Whether in a coagulated or another common mercury, and for this reason, gold, even though it is pure and clean, is much harder to bond with, adhere to, and remain with an impure, slag-filled, and chaotic mercury, whether it is coagulated or not, than with a fine, pure, and clear mercury. For every simple, singular nature desires to unite with another simple nature to become perfect, one that is in equal proportion and homogeneous with it. But gold, as stated, is nothing but mercury, though made dense or solid through its own elemental digestion and action. Therefore, although there is a temporal difference between gold and mercury, as gold is created earlier than mercury, there is no difference in their substance. Therefore, everything that gold acquires through the digestion of time, the same can also be achieved by mercury within itself, without the addition of any external substance. However, to make the work proceed more quickly and with greater efficiency, art allows mercury to take in gold, as has been previously explained, and provides it with two seeds, and arranges them accordingly. It produces the same thing that nature has created from a single seed in the mineral. But this is done in such a way that in both art and nature, one and the same material is preserved and used, although it may be called two different things depending on whether we consider the hidden or the obvious. Thus, in this work, nothing is added externally to the nature of mercury. Likewise, this work cannot be multiplied or increased by anything that is not in harmony with its original disposition. Therefore, many are mistaken who believe that the philosopher's stone can be made from various things, or even from all things, and that it can be nourished and increased by all these things instead of the aforementioned seeds, just because it is given many names. This philosophical work does not consume or take in anything external to its nature, for it does not possess a nature like that of vegetables or plants. Thus, although the philosopher's stone contains body, soul, and spirit, it is not to be understood as having a living soul like trees, plants, and vegetation. For this stone, just like all other mineral things, belongs to the first imposition, as previously mentioned, and not to another or higher imposition. The trees, plants, and vegetation, however, belong to the second imposition, as do all sensitive or perceptive things, which belong to the third, fourth, or fifth imposition, as in these last four impositions, the vegetative nature exists. This nature causes things that are subject to it to increase in size and strength. In these things, the elements are subtler than in others, because they undergo many transformations. Therefore, they are more effective, powerful, and perfect, even though in their mixture they are neither more real nor more stable, since the elements within them are not in a fixed and stable composition, but in one that can easily resolve. Therefore, they can take nourishment in a way that leads to their growth. But our stone, like all minerals, belongs to the first imposition. This stone does not grow vegetatively, that is, it does not increase in size and strength like a plant, but its nourishment and growth come from the addition of a substance that is naturally akin to it, and does not proceed in a vegetative way. For example, as experience teaches, this philosopher's stone is increased through the union of the feminine seed, namely mercury, which is added to it in such a way that it cannot be sensed directly, but happens through the digestion of fire. Like attracts like, one like thing draws another to itself and makes it like itself through the addition, not in the manner of plants. Thus, it becomes heavier in weight, stronger in power and virtue, and more perfect. The fire or heat does not increase our stone as though it were its necessary nourishment. For fire, in this case understood as external fire, does not belong to its first composition, but comes from outside to heat it. How can the flame or fire increase our stone, or make it heavier, when it cannot be mixed in a fixed way with it to remain in it, and does not belong to its first form or composition? Now, nothing else can multiply or nourish our stone, except the feminine seed, which nourishes it, the stone, through the means of heat, but it does not nourish it like vegetables are nourished, rather, this happens through addition and mixing. Whoever multiplies and nourishes in this way will not fail, for this multiplying and nourishing thing will transform into the same species, meaning it will multiply as intended. Indeed, one can increase the weight of the stone with external substances, but this happens outside of its metallic species, which cannot be altered. Such an increase in weight refers to something outside and beyond the nature of the stone, meaning it does not result in an increase within the stone itself and its own species, nor in the union of the same species. Instead, it is only a collection, a heap, and an accidental composition of many different species that can be separated again in the test. When the philosophers said that the stone is made from all things, they did not mean, as many wrongly interpret, that the stone is made from many different things that are unequal in species and nature, nor did they mean, which would be even more absurd, that the stone could be increased by external fire, considering that fire and flame can be derived from almost all things through special arts. However, this is clearly a mistaken belief, as has already been explained. When the philosophers say that the stone is made from all things, they mean that it is made from the four elements, which, through proper natural digestion, are mixed and balanced in the correct proportions. Everything born in the world is born from these four elements and is either corrupted or decays. Thus, when the philosophers speak of the stone being made from all things, they are referring to all the elements. If one of these elements were destroyed or broken, the entire proportion and species of the gold or aureate nature would be lost and destroyed. Although the highest and lowest things undergo transformation, everything is born from the four elements, either actively or potentially, visibly or hidden. Yet, this cannot be said about every growth or other similar thing, but only about our golden stone or the things that are anatized, purified or transmuted. In these things, which are not anatized, but rather born in a similar proportion of elements, not all the elements are present in their full effect at once. Instead, they exist in a comparison of their action and passion, or suffering. In these things, some elements are hidden, being passive or active in their potential, while others are manifest. But in the philosopher's stone, which is gold, since it is a work of nature that purifies, all four elements, both active and passive, both affecting and affected, are present in reality and in fact, and remain together in a balanced proportion. The aureate or golden nature is nothing other than the four elements that have been purified, yet not in the same way that the matter and form are purified and transformed. Rather, it is only their potential and act, meaning their manifest and hidden aspects, that are purified. They are not compared according to quantity, size and weight, but according to quality, characteristics, power, and virtue. Thus, the active element surpasses the passive in its action, while the passive element also surpasses the active in its suffering, because there is a balanced proportion in the gold, or in our medicine, where there is a doubled heat, doubled moisture, doubled coldness, and doubled dryness. These elements are in the act of action, meaning they are truly effective, and in the act of passion, meaning they are also suffering elements in the same proportion, namely, fire, air, water, and earth, as already explained. These elements are all called anatica and are compared in quality, not in quantity, because they stand in opposition to one another, with each being both active and passive, suffering or acting, simultaneously. Therefore, they can remain together persistently in the gold. In the gold, the passive element persistently exists within the active one, and the passive, suffering, does not oppose the active, acting, neither of them resists the other. It should not be that the elements become anatica according to quantity, where the material of fire must be as much in quantity as the earth element. If this were the case, fire would be in very unequal action with the passive earth, resulting in a greater effect of the earth. Therefore, in gold, the heavy and passive element, namely the matter or quantity, is more significant than the lighter and more active elements. When calculated according to quantity, the earth is present in greater amount due to its weight, more than water. Water exceeds air in quantity, and air exceeds fire. This makes gold the heaviest of all metals. Although in gold the proportion by quantity is unequal, it is balanced according to the qualities, characteristics, and effects, which are in an equal anatica proportion, warm, dry, moist, and cold. Each of these qualities is present in gold, as mentioned earlier. The cause of its heavy weight is due to the earth and water remaining thick and solid together, with the water dissolving the earth, as their natural affinity leads the water to dissolve the earth. Additionally, its heavy weight results from the elements being perfectly mixed together in the smallest parts, for the water does not allow the earth to become porous or spongy, both in gold and mercury. In other metals, this is not the case. In their coagulation, the slags, being foreign and expelled matter, are mixed into the metals by the nature of mercury, creating tiny, subtle pores or invisible sweat holes. This causes them to be lighter, which is nothing more than a deficiency in matter and the porosity, while the heaviness is simply the dense composition of the matter. Therefore, if the thickness, density, and weight of the water were measured as equal to the earth, they would weigh the same. However, lead is also very heavy due to its premature coagulation, which has not yet expelled the slags. As a result, pores or small holes appear, and the pure material remains too mixed with the impure, as in raw mercury, where coagulation and thickening are weak and poor. This is why lead retains the weight of mercury, not because the material is so pure as in gold, but due to the coagulation and premature cooking. Therefore, if you wish for the fire and air not to destroy the process, preserve the heat of the composition in its differing and anatica proportion. If you do not want the air and water to destroy it, maintain the moisture in the composition. Likewise, preserve the water and earth, or the earth and fire. In this work, you must properly maintain the cold and dryness according to the art of philosophy. Therefore, if any part of it is destroyed, the proportionate form and species of aureity, or the golden nature and qualities, will be destroyed as well. And for this reason, the philosophers say that our stone is made from all things, that is, from all elements. However, the element whose action composes the stone must remain internally unchanged. Therefore, all the elements are the inner principles or the beginnings, either in potential or in act, of all changing things that are created. And for this reason, they are called all things. Furthermore, you, esteemed doctor, must interpret the sayings of the philosophers and understand them according to what nature can do, and not merely according to the literal words, as they are written. For they have concealed this sacred and hidden art and its secrets, with care, in allegories, fables, riddles, and hidden words, so that the unlearned, the godless, and the unworthy do not grasp this art. Now, as I move on to the other points of your writing, I must say that I understand that the masterwork of your stone is made from gold. However, I cannot proceed to interpret this fully based on your writing, because you do not mention the very first origin of its composition. Therefore, it would be wrong to speak at length about it until you report to me more clearly about its composition and operation. I hold, however, that the elixir, or the philosopher's stone, does not stand in the signs that appear within it, nor from the properties of the flames that should nourish it, as you assign to it, and as has now been sufficiently indicated. However, since you have sent me a part of your work and your gift of such a secret work, I have taken from it your heartfelt goodwill and inclination, as well as your trust in me. Therefore, I keep the same stone as a remembrance of your friendship, and I will write something clearer when you report to me further on it. But you say that in your stone there are three things, the body, the soul, and the spirit, which, as one experienced in the art and who labors in these matters, you surely know. When the philosophers say that these three things exist in the stone of natural art, they are to be understood symbolically, as they have been found in experience. The earth they have called the body and its bones, for the earth draws together and holds the composition together, and behind it, it holds the fluid and running elements, changing their raw liquidity. They have called water and air the spirit, because these elements moisten and dissolve the earth. Air and fire, they have called the soul, for these elements vitalize and digest the entire composition. Thus, they have compared this to the human being. For in well-formed flesh, there must also be bones to hold up and carry the body, and likewise, in the flesh, there must be a life of vegetative accidents, which they have called the spirit. This is contrary to the errors of the childish philosophers, who believed that the vital spirits, that is, the living spirits of the blood, were something separate from the composed body and the pieces that compose the body. Thus, there must also be a soul in the human flesh, which directs the natural movements outside the human mind and governs the reason. But in our philosophical stone, this must be understood differently, in which the earth takes the name of bones, water and air are called the spirit, and the soul is of a different form, not present in it. This is because it, the stone, contains air and fire within it, which I know you understand clearly, though the philosophers have explained it as follows: through the raw spirit, they have extracted the digested spirit from the dissolved body or matter, and in this, they found a thick oily substance that is indestructible, which they called the soul. This makes it alive, unites it, liquefies it, and reconciles the natures. As they separated the natures in the spirit, so they reunified them in the oil. For our stone does not have a formable form, as the vegetative and sensitive forms do, but has a formed form, which is nothing other than the elements themselves. The stone is homogeneous, of one nature, which is everywhere the same. The human body, however, and the body of other animals, is not entirely of one uniform nature. In it, each part is distinct from the others: bones, flesh, blood, marrow, hair, nails, and so on. What is different in gold is that everything within it has one single species. Therefore, esteemed doctor, the philosophers say this in a metaphorical sense, regarding the administration of the art and the workings of nature, not as if there is a soul, or a spirit, or a body within it, like a formable form, as it is in humans and other animals. Rather, it is only a comparison, as you surely know. Truly, I tell you that the oil, which naturally unites the natures, liquefies, binds together, and gives medicine its entrance into other metals when one wishes to tincture them, is not made from any external substance but only from the innermost part of the body that must be dissolved. This oil always retains the color of the spirit until it is thickened again, or becomes dense, and only then does it show the royal weapons, namely the yellow color and the metallic form, which it allows to appear to everyone in each: in gold, the golden color; in silver, the silver color. This same oil, when it is a dissolved soul, is understood to be inwardly raw, although it appears outwardly white in the form of liquid mercury. Some, however, believe they wish to make as precious and powerful an oil as this one and make it from dried and powdered mercury, or from the substance of the sun, or from the body of the sun, mixed with various species. But in the end, they find through experience that they have been deceived and that it is useless for our work. You can indeed transform the metallic species into the form of oil, but you cannot bring it back into a metallic species such that the proportion of the mixture remains completely unbroken. However, such oil can be used for the medicine of the human body, as the species of gold are dissolved within it. But it does not belong to our philosophical work and is, therefore, unsuitable and useless for that purpose. Furthermore, as I continue to respond to your letter, you should certainly note the saying that fire and azoth wash and purify the laden. But azoth is not a raw mercury, as it is extracted poorly from the mineral or ore, but it is the mercury which is extracted from the dissolved bodies or metals, and it is certainly to be considered better and more refined. Since Layton is an impure body, it is purified by this azoth, as you wrote that you have once had this. And when our Layton has been washed by the azoth, then our medicine is made, through which all sickness is healed. Certainly, this azoth is made from the elixir, for the elixir is nothing other than a body that is dissolved in its mercurial water. After this dissolution, azoth is extracted from it. That is, a spirit inanimate, or a spirit that has its soul within it. The elixir is named as such from the word a, which means, from, or out of, and from the word lixis, which means, water. For all these things are made from water, and the elixir is the other part in the philosophical work, just as the rebis is called the first part of the work. The tincture is the third part of the work, as the matter of this composition constantly reveals itself differently in the work, and thus it receives different names each time. From this, it is clearly seen that azoth is not required for the elixir, for in this work, the elixir precedes azoth, and not the other way around, just as water precedes oil, and the spirit precedes the soul. For from the elixir, azoth is extracted, like oil from water, and not the other way around, as it is stated elsewhere. For example, in medicine, this is how it works. When clear spring water is combined with the flesh of a chicken through the first and crude cooking process, it forms a decoction, a good and perfect broth. When the airy and watery part of the chicken flesh is dissolved into the previously mentioned water, although other elements are also present, to make the medicine even more potent and noble, the chicken flesh is further broken down with the same water, or with a part of it, which was previously used to transform the flesh into the decoction. Then, after strong distillation, a finer and more precious broth is made, which possesses the entire nature, essence, and characteristic of the chicken flesh. For in this second decoction, not only the moist part of the chicken flesh is dissolved but also the hot part, that is, the airy or fiery part, is dissolved into the broth or decoction, mixed with it and dissolved, so that the entire strength of the chicken flesh is extracted into the previously mentioned moisture or water. In the same way, it happens in the philosophical work, for the raw mineral spirit, like water, is united or added to its body and dissolved in the first decoction. Then it is called rebis, as it is composed and assembled from two things, namely the male and female seed, that is, from what dissolves and from what is being dissolved. Hence, the verses come. The thing, or matter, of the rebis is a union of two, but still one. It is dissolved so that the first are, or should be, either the sun or the seed of the moon. The rebis is but a single thing. Yet it is prepared from two things. Silver and gold are dissolved, so that their first seed may be had. From these two things, when they are all dissolved, the elixir is made. That is, a tinctured water. As the verse states, the elixir is called the second part in Greek. For from it, pure bodies are made. Elixir is commonly called. The other part of the work is known. In it, the beautiful bodies are pure, and are beautifully transformed into water. But from this elixir, dear doctor, as the first decoction, or broth of the simple or poor decoction, the azoth is drawn out, namely through stronger and repeated distillation. This azoth has within itself the hot nature of its body from which it is extracted, and retains its effect, power, and virtue, namely an oily nature, which is hot and moist. For the azoth is fire and air in actuality, in the very fact itself, or truly, although all other elements are also in it according to their essence, by virtue of the composition. But from the now mentioned metals, through this and another art, various medicines can be made to cure the human body in sicknesses. However, they are of no use for the philosophical work and do not belong to it as the elixir belongs to the azoth, that is, the vital spirit, the living spirit, and the volatile soul are not transparent or translucent, nor clear and bright, like a vapor from an eye, or another dissolving spirit, even though they are distinguished by their degrees, so that one is of a higher degree than the other, as the soul is higher in degree than the raw spirit, although they have the same form. For just as the soul, before it is re-inspected and thickened, lies hidden under the form of a dissolved spirit, for the soul, when extracted from the body, always appears like mercury, so afterward, when the inspissation, the thickening, is completed, the soul and the spirit lie hidden under the form of the body. Thus, you have seen and experienced this before with the powder, which was sent to the king, of whom you are the physician. In this powder, you found mercury under the form of mercury. When in this same powder, that which had stayed at the bottom and had coagulated, it would have taken the form of the same powder, and would have acquired it. Such a powder, however, has only the bare name, a tincture, and is not a medicine of the metals, for it is not yet completely fixed, even though it might serve as a medicine for the human body. But such a medicine, belonging to the human body, surpasses, without any doubt, in all virtues, such a medicine very highly, both in the metals and the human body, which is completely fixed and stable. However, this cannot happen in a clear, transparent liquid or moisture. For when the aforementioned elixir and azoth, namely, the soul and the spirit, would have transparency or assume it, it would indicate that in proportion, the earth would have left the water before it, and the water would have separated from the earth. These earths would have thickened and coagulated the water, and in the elixir and azoth, it would have created an opacity, that is, visible thickness, and would be the cause of the formation of the metallic coagulation. For the fixed metallic species must be restrained, that is, hindered from their fluidity and drawn together. Something must be there that restrains and draws together that which should be restrained, and something that causes it to coagulate. This cannot happen in the previously mentioned transparent and clear water. In the vegetative, however, there is another opinion. When the common transparent poor water is cooked with them, it is thickened with them. However, this same water softens and evaporates in the fire, for the water is not permanent, fixed, or stable in its composition. The common water has no homogeneous earths in its composition, which are of its nature, and which nature has added to it, as mercury does. These earths are the cause that things of homogeneous or uniform nature have a lasting and steadfast fixation. Therefore, because the transparent water does not have such earths, it cannot be fixed with the vegetative things, as mercury can be fixed with metals. Now, when mercury in the philosophical work receives such transparency, it must, due to the aforementioned causes, necessarily follow that it can no longer be restrained or drawn together, nor can it coagulate again into a metallic species and proportion over the latent, the base metal, because it no longer retains its coagulation, that is, the water has no earth in it anymore, which is a mercurial earth, and the first cause of thickening, coagulation, and fixation. Now, if this water is to remain in its metallic proportion, how can one produce uniform metallic species from this composition? They are greatly mistaken, those who believe they can extract a clear, transparent, and translucent water from mercury and accomplish many wonders with it. For if they make such a water, it is of no use for the work, neither for its nature and proportion, and it cannot be brought back and developed into its perfect metallic species. For as soon as mercury is transformed from its first nature, it is excluded from our philosophical work, for it has lost its spermatic nature, its seed, and its metallic nature. From this, one can now easily deduce where your opinion agrees with the truth, and where it fails again. In saying that to make the highest elixir, as I believe, one must have a gumma, in which everything needed is enclosed, which contains the 4 elements, and this gumma is a very clear water, like a vapor from an eye, and made spiritual, which makes the gold into a purer spirit. For one body cannot penetrate another body unless it is a subtle, spiritual, frozen substance, which penetrates and colors the body. So it is as you say, dear doctor, that the natures cannot be joined together except with a gumma or an oily substance, which is similarly proportioned and contains a spiritual nature. But the elements must be fixed and stable within it, so that it ultimately brings the entire philosophical stone into a liquid form that displays all the elements, and stands there as a metal, in a metallic nature, but also stands there again as a subtle, spiritual substance, which penetrates and colors the metallic bodies. For when the raw spirit is sublimed first, this stone retains its form and species, namely the species of the same spirit, and in its transformation into a perfect large gumma, it does not lose its first nature. Therefore, The oil and the gumma belong to this stone in no other form than as anatized, compared, and united elements, which can be resolved or dissolved and united in the viscosity and fattiness of the earths, remaining united, like buried, and thus mixed, so that they can no longer be separated from each other. For this oil or gumma is first extracted from the body, and introduced into the light fluid spirit until the remaining moisture of the water turns into air, and thus one element awakens from another through digestion, and that which had a watery form previously receives an oily nature. Finally, the entire stone receives the name of a gumma and of sulfur. Then this teaches the philosopher Geber, as he says, as you write, that if someone can unite and combine our sulfur with the metallic bodies, they have discovered the greatest secrets and a way to perfection. He seems to want to say, if someone brings the body to the point that it becomes a gumma, which can mix with the other imperfect metals, they have found a great secret of nature. For this stone, when it is perfect and complete, is both a gumma and sulfur, as explained earlier. But you must know that Geber, with great caution and wonderful craftsmanship, has hidden the truth under a veil, and he makes much of it obscure and false underneath, which the unlearned, at first glance, take to be the truth. However, under these obscurities, he speaks in a hidden manner, according to the philosophical way, and still describes the truth clearly, philosophically, and in a highly learned manner. Therefore, when the unlearned and inexperienced sophists come to Geber, not understanding his mind, intellect, or sharpness, they fall upon the common interpretation according to the literal meaning, as the words themselves sound. For he says, if you know or understand the art, then we have indeed said something to you, but if you do not understand, then we have said nothing. Therefore, when you wish to read in the books of the philosophers, you must especially pay attention to what is possible in nature. It is also possible that some who have written about this philosophical art have erred, misled, and misunderstood the nature of things. For example, one must note the writings of Arnold of Villanova, who in his book called Rosarium wrote that the raw mercury, which is cold and moist by its nature, will become hot and dry through sublimation. Afterward, when it is made alive again, it will become warm and moist, and thus similar to the human complexion. What would it be then, one might say, if mercury is united with gold and added to it, so that it takes on the nature of gold? For mercury has a nature that allows it to be transformed and changed, just as the mercury in the heavens is revealed according to the planet with which it is united. But regarding Arnold, although he was certainly a highly learned and thoughtful doctor, it appears as though he wrote about this art more from experience than from a thorough understanding of its foundational causes. For when he says that one should sublime the raw spirit from the lesser salty minerals, and through this process the mercury, which is naturally cold and moist, becomes a hot and dry powder, this is of no use to our philosophical work. Even though he may make such a powder from mercury, as he says, which becomes dry and hot through sublimation from the salty substances, such purifications are ineffective and worthless, even harmful to our work. For although the lesser minerals share a connection with the metals in their nature, they do not share the same nature, species, or proportion. Even though the lesser and higher minerals, which grow beneath the earth, are of the same imposition and thus of the same nature, they differ from each other in proportion, qualities, or characteristics, and in their form and species. Therefore, when mercury is distilled and dried with the lesser minerals, its internal nature is disrupted, its proportions are thrown into confusion and destroyed, and it is then incapable of performing the task that the feminine seed should accomplish and create. It is entirely ineffective for the work of the metals. For as soon as mercury is transformed into the form of a powder, unless it is from the corporeal body of gold or silver, it acquires an external appearance that is entirely useless for the philosophical work. However, I am not opposed to the idea that mercury, when it is impure and unclean, may and should be purified or sublimed once or several times through inferior salts, as philosophical experience demonstrates and requires, to remove the external mineral impurities and contamination from it. But this must be done in such a way that the liquidity or fluidity and radical humidity, or the mercurial species and form, always remain unbroken and undestroyed, which is the true mercuriosity according to its natural proportion. For the mercurial form and shape must remain intact in this work, as stated before, and its external form must not be introduced into any dried powder. For when the external form is destroyed, it indicates that the innermost nature has also been disturbed. It would then be as if Mercury had been changed and altered by the form of generation, as one can clearly see in the signs that appear in the work, following the path of nature. For there are some sublimations where Mercury is sublimed from its own bodies, which are most thoroughly amalgamated and inwardly united and mixed. When it is then raised from these bodies repeatedly and rejoined and reunited with them, it loses the excess and throws it off, so its nature is not disrupted. It then becomes fit for the philosophical work and can effectively solve the metallic species. However, it is not changed or altered in its nature for the philosophical work, unless it is altered by the fixed bodies that have been dissolved in it. When it is made into powder and dried, many wonders may be performed with it in the treatment of the human body. But whether it is then made into oil or water, or remains as a powder, it is still of no use for the philosopher's work. Therefore, the general rule must be this: as soon as mercury is made into powder, whatever form it takes, outside the nature of the body to be dissolved, it is no longer useful for the philosophical work. There are still some sophists and deceivers who add a Venus or other species to mercury and make a sophistry from it. That is, they give the imperfect Venus a color, but not a natural color, rather they give it an appearance, but not the true species, that is, the transmutation or true transformation. It is like someone painting or carving an image of a dead person, which may resemble a human, but it is not truly a human. Thus, the difference between a true human and a painted image is as great as the difference between a sophist's work and the philosopher's work. Therefore, such sophistical mixtures, even though they are mineral in nature, are not stable in the tests of fire. For they are not drawn from nature through digestion into their proper proportions, so such mixtures, through this sophistical art, are not changed significantly in the decoction. Therefore, the same copper only has the appearance of being dyed on the outside, but inwardly it is of no value. This sophistical trickery in recipes must be discarded, for the truth of the art proves that a work that is sophistical and false is nothing of the kind. But to speak again about Arnold, someone might further say that, as Arnold purified mercury by sublimation, he dried it in its natural state, and then made it live again, moistening, warming, and moistening it so that it became congruent with its body in nature, as you speak of. However, dear doctor, this does not remove the truth, but rather brings the error in this natural art to light. Then, as it is also plainly stated, Arnold teaches that mercury, when dried, should be made alive again by being thrown into boiling water, which will make it warm and moist. However, it was supposed to have been warm and dry as a sublimation beforehand. But which true philosopher would say that mercury or any other metal, by means of common water, whether it is warm or boiling, could be changed in its internal properties and nature, or would acquire natural moisture, and thus come alive again? In this reanimation, mercury gains nothing new, since common water neither boils nor changes it. The water does not enter into the mercury, and what does not enter cannot change anything. Everything that is to be changed must have an entrance into the mixture. Such water may indeed wash away a surface impurity from mercury, but it cannot pour any new properties into it. For the very nature that mercury had when it was made into powder and killed by sublimation is the same nature it retains when it is brought back to life. I do not wish to dishonor Arnold with this, but rather to speak the truth based on experience, to which I adhere. Therefore, dear Sir Doctor, I humbly conclude my response, and I ask that you kindly accept what I have written and understand it in the best way possible. I did not intend to contradict your opinion, but rather to engage in a discourse. If my response has given you something to reflect upon, please receive it graciously. If you wish, let me know in writing, and I will provide you with further explanations according to my abilities, as much as the true teacher, our Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the blessed God in eternity, will grant grace. Amen. Thanks be to Christ. The end.